you and I spoke last, we have seen explosions in a residential neighborhood of Moscow, purported to be about 10 minutes from the official residence of President Putin. There's one of the explosions now. In fact, that's the biggest of them. Your colleague, Colonel Tony Schaefer, says that could be 500 to 1,000 pounds. He also says that there's some significance. Gary, if you'll run it again, at the very beginning, very, very beginning of the red flash, which would tell ordnance people about how large and powerful it is. So how did it come about that something like this occurred in a residential neighborhood in Moscow? Is President Zelensky a loose cannon? Has the U.S. consented to this, or both?
Well, we know a couple of things. First of all, this attack was launched from inside Russia. And Americans are always saying, well, what's wrong with the Russians? How can't they secure their borders? They have 1,100 miles to be concerned about. That's quite a border. And it's inevitably going to be penetrated. Most of it is heavily forested. What isn't forested involves large rivers. So trying to secure all of it is difficult. Somebody said that roughly 19 of these drones were launched. All were shot down except these three, and these three exploded harmlessly on the ground. Now, as far as the payload is concerned, I'm a little skeptical of the size. You can make a small explosion look like a big one, depending upon, where you photograph it. I think they were using the Orlan drones that were originally devised or developed in the Soviet period, and they carry a payload of perhaps 30, 40 pounds of explosive max. So I have difficulty believing that was a 500 or 1,000 pound bomb.
Are the Russian air defenses weak?
No, absolutely not.
Well, how did this how would something like this get through? If this had hit the president's house, it would have destroyed it, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, it didn't come anywhere near the house. It's a residential area, but they seem to have petered out on their own. It may be they ran out of fuel, or they had some kind of problem with the motors, or that it could also be they were jammed, because the Russians have done a brilliant job. They probably knock 300 or 400 Ukrainian drones out of the air every day, thanks to their jamming systems, which are the best in the world. So I don't know, except that I'm not even sure this was Ukrainian. There's some evidence that the SAS is involved, penetrating into Russia and
what's SAS, Colonel? Special
Air Service. That's the British equivalent of Special Operations. They ultimately, behind the scenes, took credit for the explosion. That was an attempt to disable the bridge between Crimea and Russia. They're very good at this sort of thing. I'm sure that's a distinct possibility. If they were Ukrainian, they had someone with them that knew what they were doing.
If they were Ukrainian, is it likely that American intelligence knew about it? And if the answer to that is yes, is it likely that the DOD or the Department of State or the National Security Council or whoever's giving Ukraine marching orders knew about it? I'm trying to figure out if President Putin would have an argument that Joe Biden or somebody who works for him ordered an attack on his house.
Well, I'm sure President Biden would insist on plausible deniability. Well, I wasn't informed, or we did not urge them to do that, something like that. You have to be realistic. Everything they do is based on data that we provide to them. In other words, overhead surveillance, overhead photography, down to the smallest detail. These things are not accidental. So the intelligence support is absolutely, definitely there. But again, plausible deniability. They didn't tell us they were going to do it today, but we knew they were going to do it for weeks. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't finish.
I hear you. Here's Admiral Kirby just a few minutes ago on this very subject.
Clarify for us again the U.S. policy here, because it says that as a general matter, Ukraine shouldn't strike inside Russia. What exactly does that mean, general matter? And does Ukraine, a country that's been under attack for more than a year, not have a legitimate right to attack its aggressor back on its own territory?
We don't tell them where to strike. We don't tell them, where not to strike. We don't tell them how to conduct their operations. We give them equipment. We give them training. We give them advice and counsel. Heck, we even do tabletop exercises with them to help them plan out what they're going to do. But ultimately, President Zelensky and his military commanders decide what they're going to do from a military perspective. And they decide what they're going to do with the equipment that has been provided to them and that they now own. All that said, we have been very clear that we do not support attacks inside Russia. And we do not enable and we do not encourage attacks inside Russia.
Credible, Colonel?
I remember another public figure who said, I feel your pain, but I did not have sex with that woman.
Yes. Okay.
And we later discovered, oh gosh, surprise, surprise, he had sex with her. So I think this falls into the same category. I would not expect him to say anything else, but I would not impute any integrity to it.
I'm just trying to come to grips with the idea that the United States government may have looked the other way or facilitated an attack on the capital of Russia, and whether they have the remotest idea of the ramifications of that behavior.
Well, the combination of arrogance and self-delusion is very powerful. Remember, the majority of people that you're dealing with in Washington today still view Russia through the lens of 1994-95. They think they're dealing with a failed state that has a weak economy, a society that is on the verge of revolt. I mean, these kinds of things are widely believed. None of it's true. Anyone else with half a brain understands the economy in Russia is very strong. Russia has the resources and the capability to last indefinitely. They have a huge manpower pool. I mean, we go down the list. It's just not true. But unfortunately, these delusions persist. And then you add this to arrogance. And they think also that we are the same military power that we were in 1991. And judge, we're not. There's nothing we have today that the Russians do not also have. Whatever advantages we once had in many key areas, they're gone.
You've seen this clip before, but I can't resist the temptation of running it past you again in light of what you just said about arrogance. Here's Victoria Nuland about 4 or 5 months ago encouraging an invasion of Crimea with American military support.
There is a drone base in Crimea where the drones that the Iranians have given Russia are being launched from. There are command and control sites in Crimea that are essential for Russia's hold on all of the territory, including the land bridge. There are mass military installations on Crimea that Russia has turned into essential logistics and back office depots for this war. Those are legitimate targets. Ukraine is hitting them, and we are supporting that.
There's the battering ram argument, right out of the mouth of the number 3 official in the United States Department of State.
Yeah, well, she's telling you the truth. Everything she said is accurate. I obviously don't support the policy position. She would have made a great spokesman for the Soviet armed forces back during the Second World War in 1941, when the heroic forces of the motherland were throwing back the Wehrmacht. We all know that didn't happen. Went on for years. So this is the sort of thing you just take it in. You understand that this person is part of a partisan group of people who are determined to keep us at war, and not just us, but our allies. And they will do anything in their power to sustain this. And if that involves lying, then so be it.
Here's another one of those partisans, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, just 4 days ago, meeting with President Zelensky in Kyiv.
Nice to meet you. How are you, sir? We have, I think, the full meeting. Thank you very much. Thanks, United States, people of the United States, for all big support. Thank you so much. Free or die.
Free or die.
Now you are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are dying. It's the best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
Well, now, how reckless is that? The best money we've ever spent is on Russians dying.
Well, there are two kinds of fools. There's the harmless fool that tells funny jokes and is self-deprecating. And then there are dangerous fools. This man falls into the second category. He's a dangerous fool. He does not understand what he confronts. He does not understand the consequences of our actions that could ultimately spread to Europe and ultimately to the United States. Russia is not just a great power. It is one of the great powers on the planet. And he doesn't seem to get it. He doesn't want to believe that. He's happy with the delusion and the arrogance. And that's what you saw.
Remember, he, at the outset of the military conflagration, advised President Biden in a very public way that Putin should be assassinated.
Yeah, of course. Well, look, the Senate is a strange place, Judge. The Senate is the closest thing that you're going to find to fantasy land in politics. It's kind of a Mount Olympus with a circus on it. And people bloviate in it all the time, saying lots of things for which they're never held accountable and which that don't really ultimately involve themselves. They say it for effect. He's one of the best, says lots of things for effect. And he assumes that there's no buck stopping at his door. And he misses the point that dragging us into a major war with Russia would be catastrophic for us, for Europe, for the Russians.